Hey guys, Silky, and today we have got perhaps what is going to be one of the most important videos I've made to date. It's the first in a three-part series where we talk about battle groups and their composition. Initially we're going to talk about Strike Craft in this one, probably with a little bit of an intro as to how we got here with the game and how Strike Craft, capital ships and officers all interact and where that originally came from, because that will help explain a few of the issues I guess that we're coming across and that we've seen, and try to get to the bottom of what some of those little gnarly issues are. And today we're going to start that one off with the Strike Craft. So the first thing to talk about with Strike Craft, and certainly with the battle groups in general, is where does this all come from? There's a long history going back perhaps the last 10 to 15 years of these sort of geostrat tile war games, and this is one of the latest episodes, and very much this is based on a more recent one, came out in 2021 I think it was, and that was Lord of the Rings Rise to War. And I believe that some people have on the development team have been involved in playing that game at some point in time, and a lot of what's gone on there really does sort of flow through into this particular game, and we can see that in action when we actually go in and have a look at one of these battle reports. And in fact I think it is actually on the cipher. If I go into this cipher here and have a quick look at the details here, and I go into the combat logs, we'll have a look at this, and we go down here. So what we have here with the cipher is these two specific skills come right at the end of the skill tree, and we've got one called long range specialist, damage against long range strike craft plus 35%. And yet here we see in the battle report, which is a bit of a giveaway, cipher is granted damage dealt increase to ranged units. Now ranged units are, it's not a term that we would normally use in War of Nova. They would be long-range strike craft as denoted here, but in the actual battle report we can see that we've got probably a direct import from Lord of the Rings Rise to War. Big game hunter, damage against heavy strike craft, but here in the report it actually says it's granted damage dealt increased to large units. So if you're kind of wondering what that's all about, we'll just go and have a quick look probably at a few of the things that we've seen before, I prepared before for Lord of the Rings Rise to War. And just pulled this one up quickly. What we have here is a set of spreadsheets that I put together along with others, well in particular this one here myself, for a website we were building for that previous game that never came to be as we got superseded by 2.0. And what we got here is Mountain Warrior Commander against ranged units, damage dealt plus 2%. So ranged units. We've also got large units. Rise to War basically operated with small, medium and large units, and they had different numbers of them per command point. So large units we've got here, these were four of those beasts would fit into 100 points of command. Shire Protectors were 50, Oathbreakers were 100, so you get 100 of these to every two of these, and to every whatever it is, 25 of the other, I think it is. Anyway, so you got small, medium and large, and in Rise to War there was a counter system whereby each of those gained an additional damage bonus or damage reduction bonus for incoming damage based on the opposite one they were fighting against. So rock, paper, scissors if you like. In other games you could have had that as between foot soldiers, ranged and cavalry. I think it was in Mortal Conquest, the game that came before that one. In various other iterations of these games have a counter system where different units counter one another out. This game doesn't appear to have that, so that's not something that's necessarily been imported. And realistically, I think that probably when the skills and abilities have been given to capital ships and strike craft, really they kind of almost get the feeling that some of them were sort of thrown up a bit in the air and kind of landed where they might happen to go. There are obviously a number of ships which have really had a lot of playing around with and have been tailor-made for the game. Others I think could do with a little bit of loving, and they will come perhaps into the game a little bit later. We'll do another video covering some of those capital ships that need a bit of extra love. But one of the other things I wanted to sort of bring up here that does affect Strike Craft is the fact that with these, if you like, original titles, or if you, for want of a better term, the primary skill rather than the two sort of sub branches of a skill, we get some bonuses for our capital ships that give us a whopping extra 2 hit points, perhaps if we're lucky, for some of our units or strike craft that we're using. Now you look at that and you've got 900 hit points on your as a base level on a short range craft that's in the light variety rather than the medium or heavy, and essentially you're thinking, well, why on earth have I only got 2 hit points on top of my 900? That's really not a very great bonus on the capital ship. So perhaps those would need a look at, because they do actually affect strikecraft viability. And the reason why we kind of have this come up is, like, for instance, here we've got like Min would have had 2 hit points in Rise to War extra as the sort of bonus for putting 15 points into your skill. Hobbits here were +5, elves hit points +3, and the reasoning sort of, if I just swap over to here and we look at some of the hit points on these units, which are all listed down here, we can see that they have particularly, standard units have particularly low hit points compared to the strike craft that we're using. So adding on an extra 2 or 3 hit points to these here alchemists and war drummers and so on would have added an extra kind of 5-10% worth of hit points. Well, in terms of strike craft in War of Nova, that would be the equivalent of adding on perhaps between, I don't know, somewhere between 40 and 50 hit points to a strike craft, perhaps a little more. So you could either change those up, multiply it by 10, probably 20, where you've got those in instances as the bonus for achieving putting 15 points into a skill on your capital ship, or you could maybe work it out as a percentage, although we might, because of the way they worked out with the huge amounts of hit points on the large strike craft, I think percentage might sort of overcook that. The other thing I wanted to do just before we dive into having a look at the strike craft themselves is having a quick look at the Darkfang, because this helps to explain some of the issues that we see where these sort of skills have been thrown up in the air and landed on ships randomly. Darkfang actually, it got a bit of a nerf last season. A few people were complaining that it was eternally working as a draw ship, but I actually think it was fairly easy to beat in PvP, or you could get a very favourable draw against it. And I think that really sort of sells short the kind of free-to-play and low pain spenders a bit, because this was a superb ship for getting ahead in player versus environment very early on in the game. And I really do wish that you would actually return this vampiric attack to, instead of recovering 80% hit points on round start, actually making it as it used to be, which was to recover 80% hit points each time it does damage. And that way you might actually find that your lower spend and free-to-play players are actually getting off to a good start within the game, because currently there's only the Sunder which does really, really well in those early days, unless you happen to have a stacked load of really good healing officers. Anyway, the issue here is we have these this Blood and Honor skill, and we have long range strike craft damage plus 22%, and then we have the next one is heavy strike craft damage plus 2%. So we can put in these long range and heavy strike craft, but there are no heavy long range strike craft out there, so you can't really stack that. So you might think, oh well, we could stack with a racial bonus. Tyrannis and Ograx damage received minus 2%, Ograx and Tyrannis strike craft damage dealt plus 2.4%, but they don't actually have any of these long range ones. So you then have to use 15 skill points here to get, if you like, a double stack and make this thing actually worthwhile. Perhaps you could look at changing that a little bit and saying that actually you might have all heavy or all light or whatever damage received minus 2% for these, and then some extra damage out here, and you can make a really good viable ship out of the Darkfang. In fact, it would be quite superb. You might just have to think, if you were doing that, of not making the change that I originally said, because that's great in PvP. That said, I think that would be sort of something that could viably fight against the Cypher, which at the moment is extreme. Everyone can get a decent Cypher. Now, whether you've got it at Mastery level 5 as a free-to-play player, or at Mastery levels, or I've seen some level 22s flying around, which is quite obscene, really, trying to fight them. who knows? And one of the things that comes up through most of these things that we've been looking at when we come to look at these strike craft is the fact that there are only about 4 or 5 that are viable, and some of those that are actually viable are because some of the others are bugged. For instance, we've seen a lot of ships that actually do a counter attack, and people are using those simply because the Harpies, which if you like are the best assault ship in the game, or best damage dealing ship in the game, strike craft, sorry, not ship, basically they're not actually firing off once they get hit by a counter attack. And I think I had this come up somewhere in one of my Widow reports on a 300 tile here earlier, where after the Cyclops that we've got sitting in there has taken out most of the actual damage for the first 3 rounds, and the Harpies are actually trying to fire off here. I'm fairly sure I've picked up the right report here. Let me just scroll through. Harpy attacks the Basilisk. So Basilisk has this lovely counter attack. The minute a Harpy gets hit by a counter attack, or it doesn't actually even necessarily get hit, it attacks the Basilisk. The Basilisk is granted an attack. It's triggered the skill counter strike. It tries to, but it was stunned. Harpy launches skill second chance, only it doesn't. It simply does not. And if you look through and add up the damage stats in the summary report, you'll see that it has not done that during the actual battle. So we've got a kind of perverse situation where some strike craft are viable at the moment in terms of the fact they have a counter attack, only because the Harpy itself is glitched. So let's get into the actual nitty gritty of this and go and have a look at our strike craft. That's what we're actually here for. That's hopefully what the development team are going to be looking at when they come to see this particular video. Hopefully they're not too disheartened by some of the things I've said already. And here we go. Now the issue we've got is, let's start with Arkos, because this here, the Arkos Harpy, this is the standard bureau. This is the bar set, if you like, for assault. I don't suggest you change anything with the Harpy. I think we should be bringing other strike craft up to its level. Now we've got damage 185 to 202. That is the highest base damage in the game for a strike craft as far as I'm aware, or certainly for a viable one. We've got a 100% chance to gain follow-up. Unfortunately, there's a bit of a glitch at the moment whereby if it gets hit by a counter strike, it doesn't get that chance. Got no idea why that is. There are possibly some other scenarios where that's not going off as well, and I have seen instances where it hasn't actually been able to score even its first hit during the entire battle after it's been hit by certain status effects. We also, on hit, reduce the enemy target defense by 50%. So you do one hit at this high level of damage of 185 to 202, then you reduce the opponent's armor by half, and then you get another hit again. So that's a fairly high amount of damage. Drawbacks with it: initiative is only 80. It's always going to go somewhere near the bottom of the pile in the various rounds that there are in a battle. Health is very low at 675, so they're very squishy, and the defense of 120 is about average. So that is our Harpy. It's not got no use for pathing or getting us around the battlefield at any great speed. 67 is particularly low. That's right there with the real heavy hitting Cyclops and so on. So that's our standard for actually assault damage. So let's have a look and see how the other Arkos ships compare, and this is quite easy to do because they are all lightweight craft. Now we have the Seraph. Immediately we can see we've got slightly higher health, 900. Its initiative is the same and speed is the same. Its damage is just over half the amount that a Harpy puts out as a base amount, so you would hope to have some decent skills in here that would bring it up to the same level. It's unaffected by stun, marginally useful. Defense plus 20%, marginally useful. And damage received from long range strike craft minus 30%. So it's almost like it's kind of there to tank and put out a bit of damage when you get hit by stun. And there's a lot of stun around in the game, but there's also a lot of stun resistance around in the game, be it in capital ships or officers. So that stun resistance is perhaps a little useful in some cases. That's there, but realistically this thing is not putting out the damage, and in fact probably a Basilisk in the Ograx area, which is a medium craft, puts out the same amount of damage but has much higher defense and health. It has a counter attack. I can't see any situation where you would use the Seraph. What you could do to improve this perhaps is put this initiative up maybe to 100 or even 120, so it goes before a Harpy in a turn and gets a hit in, because toe-to-toe Seraphs versus Harpies, Harpy's just going to wipe this out in no time at all. So I would say fiddle around with this, put this up. The defense at 100 and plus 20%, that's useful. The anti-stun is useful. Damage received from long-range strike craft, yeah, maybe that could be replaced with some kind of a assault stat, or if not, I think simply in this case just increase that initiative up considerably so it goes off, for instance, before a number of other ships. Put that damage up maybe by 50% overall, so that will be coming in at around about 130, 140, up to, what, 170 damage. Perhaps even narrow that down so that it's just sort of sitting between 150 to 165 damage, and then might actually become useful. I think in terms of its actual skills, you can probably leave them there, but have it doing a bit of damage as well as being able to sustain some. And then we've got the, what have we got next? The Sphinx. If ever there was a case for someone needing a bit of love, it will probably be the Sphinx. We've got the very base level damage, low initiative, low speed. It's got a bit of siege, but like frankly, you're not going to be using it for siege. You're going to be using either Ograx or Stonar ships for siege regardless. And what have we got in here? Deals an additional 20% energy damage. That's marginally useful. I mean, the energy damage... probably it misses the opponent's shields, but it's not a very high amount of extra damage. And round 5 onwards, damage plus 70% to the end of the battle. You're going to be dead in the water before that happens. Even if you've got a Cyclops up there sopping up the first 3 rounds, in the next 1 or 2 you're really going to get hit hard. You've got a low initiative already. Perhaps we might think about either swapping up the same way we did with the Seraph, the damage amount and the initiative amount, or I think there could be a case here for perhaps having an escalating amount of damage increase. So in perhaps round 1 you get plus 15, by round 2 you're getting plus 30, by round 4 it would be plus 60, by round 5 it would be plus 75, and just have that increasing across the beginning of the battle, 15% each time. So we'll move next on to Ograx. We've got the Cyclops. This is the standard bearer for tanking. It's a standard bearer for tanking because it's got this huge amount of defense and health. Okay, a little bit susceptible to energy damage or elemental damage of any sort because of the health. It's got a slightly higher initiative than all the Arkos ships at 90. Its base damage, it's not really putting out a lot. You'd need to divide that down by 4 to work out what that is. So it's only 60 to 60, 75 maybe. Siege isn't particularly good. But damage received minus 15%. That's all damage, not just physical damage, one assumes. And first 3 rounds, it takes the standard attacks for everyone. So that's whether it's a standard attack from a capital ship rather than a skill attack, or it's a strike craft standard attack. Talking about attacks and standard attacks on the strike craft, we'll come to something in a minute where we really do need to start and understanding the difference between, if you like, a passive skill and an actual active skill. Now we'll come on to those in when we get to the Tyrannis, certainly to the Inquisitor, because I want to talk about that further, but that's something just to think about for now, how these skills actually work. So anyway, there we go. That's our main tank. Morningstar used to be good until it was sort of got this weird glitch where it doesn't do what it's supposed to anymore. So pretty much everyone's using Cyclops, everyone uses Harpies, and the number of people are now using Basilisks. They were actually being used certainly a little bit in Season 1. We saw quite a few of those on Server 1. They're kind of somewhere in between. They do quite a bit of damage here, slightly better than a Cyclops. They don't take the hits on behalf of anyone else, but they have this wonderful counter-attack. This is the best ship to use against Harpies at the moment with the Harpy glitch. So you've got a 70% chance to counter-attack at the top there for 50% damage. But it's not great in any means, but certainly up against the Harpies at the moment, it just knocks out that follow-up chance of the Harpy. You could say that's a great counter, but I'm fairly sure that certainly from Season 1, where Harpies were ruling the roost, they didn't have that glitch. maybe it was done intentionally with the Harpy, but honestly, why would you knock down all your strike craft ability to deal damage and just have this boring scenario where really it's only the capital ships that are dishing it out? That would make no sense, surely. So the Harpy needs to get fixed. Perhaps the Basilisk won't be doing so well. That said, certainly in Season 1, I've been using these as a sort of a small backup group, if you like, to take a few hits as a third strike craft alongside in the Corruptor and so on, because it does actually take something out, and it does do a little bit of damage in return. And it's got this really high initiative of 130, so it gets in first. While we're on it, medium plating, we see this for every single medium strike craft there is. Every medium strike craft has medium plating, damage received minus 10%. Just a suggestion here, could we mix it up a little bit? And some of these might have a medium plating of damage received minus 10%. Perhaps a few you could change to physical damage received minus 20, minus 25%, and another suggestion would be elemental damage received minus 20, minus 25%, perhaps minus 25% or minus 30% with elemental damage received. And you could start making more of your medium strike craft actually usable. They would actually have a really viable function. So I think we'll come on to that as we go through a few more of the mediums. The Basilisk doesn't really need too much changing around it, so we'll leave that as is. And the Werewolf, well, basically it's a siege ship, siege 20 per command point. It's the equal best siege unit in the game. You don't necessarily need to throw anything else around this. Otherwise you're going to make it obscene, and an assault craft, a really good assault that does great siege as well. So I wouldn't change a thing about that. It's got its purpose already. It knows what it is and what it's supposed to be doing. Tyrannis. We have got the Zealot, same base damage as the various Arkos ships, not particularly great, so we want to see something else that improves it somewhere. Initiative is still only 80 and speed 67, so what does it have that could hold up against a Harpy? Damage received from close range strike craft minus 20%. Could be good against somebody running all tanks, but if they're running all tanks, then their capital ship has probably got obscene damage coming out of it. That extra damage received from close range strike craft is not going to help it against a capital ship that's dishing out the damage. 10% chance to evade damage. Well, that's pathetic, really. 10% chance to evade damage across 10 rounds, where you might be getting hit 5 times a round. So you might get 5 chances throughout the entire game to actually evade the damage. That's nothing. You're going to be dead in the water with health 900 and defense 120 if that's the case. So if you really want this thing to be sopping up damage and doing something decent as a close range strike craft, if you're not putting out the damage, similar situations to some of the Arkos Craft, you need to actually be reducing it. So damage received from close range strike craft, I would simply replace that with something like damage received from capital ship minus 20%. That would suddenly become really, really useful. Or damage received from capital ships minus 25%, minus 30%. Let's bring in something that can actually stand up to capital ship damage. 10% chance to evade damage. If you want to stick with it, yeah, by all means. I would rather go something like 25% chance to evade damage, 20% chance to evade damage, or put it 100% chance to evade in the first round. Some other units have that. But if you want to make this thing viable, you're either going to have to significantly beef it up, or you're going to have to make it a really kind of specific utility ship, which might be that, as I suggested before, you could make this or some other ship something that reduces damage received from the capital ship. Here we go for the Inquisitor. Now these were great used with a Darkfang back in Season 1 until the Darkfang got nerfed, and their skill actually had something weird and wonderful going on, whereby it actually states here standard attacks prioritise enemies with the lowest defense. Well, in Season 1 till it was patched and fixed, this used to dish out one standard attack, and then it used to have this kind of active skill that launched straight after. So that got fixed, so it wasn't shooting off twice in a round. Unfortunately, when it was fixed, it's still sitting here as an active skill. Now that should be a passive skill that should be introduced at the beginning of the battle, because at the moment when it takes its first hit in a battle, it shoots off a normal standard attack. It doesn't prioritize the enemy with the lowest defense, and it doesn't do 135% damage. It's only in the second round, once this kicks in, that it starts to do that. So that needs fixing to become a passive skill. And honestly, the 135%, I think you could probably get up to about 160 on that and still have it not overpowered but actually viable. It's got good initiative, so it can go off first, so it could get in and sort of knock out a few harpies, for instance. So that could make it really useful, changing this to 160% and having it actually happen right from the beginning of the battle instead of kicking in turn 2. Next up on here we have got the Oppressor. Half decent initiative, very base damage, base defense and health, base speed. So what have we got that makes it good? Round 5, here we go again, that damage plus 70% to the end of the battle. Change that warm-up skill, make it 15% from round 1, keep bringing it up. That will make your Oppressor semi-useful against medium strikecraft, damage plus 30%. Okay, hardly anyone's using them except in small amounts to knock out the Harpy, because the Harpy's glitch. There aren't, if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't even really be seeing that many medium strikecraft anyway. But let's assume that we do our jobs right and we actually make most of the medium strikecraft viable. Then this could actually have a place in the game. So against them, damage plus 30%. Okay, that's not too bad. It doesn't have very good base damage to start with. Damage received minus 20. I don't know if this is just minus 20 points or minus 20%, but if you've got a Harpy dishing you out kind of 200 points of damage a hit or 400 points in a turn, and you're only losing 10% of that, that's really not very good at all. Ideally, you want to be using it against medium strikecraft anyway, that don't necessarily have high hitting damage, but we're trying to bump some of those up. So there could be a place for this as it is. I would actually increase that damage by maybe 10-20% perhaps. And then this here, damage received minus 20% perhaps, might be good rather than minus 20. And that would be the Oppressor. And so next up we have got Omega. I can't remember ever using an Omega Strikecraft apart from when Darkfang was working well, and I happen to have liked the look of the black hat, I think it's called, or black hat, and it had a pretty decent counter attack. It always goes off and it doesn't deal as much damage as perhaps the Basilisk, but the Basilisk only has a 70% chance of striking back. But what is it about this black hat that nobody likes? Well, it's squidgy. It's squidgy as heck. It does have a decent damage range, which is great. But again, against that Harpy, if you're going and stacking up against a Harpy and you're getting hit twice for this amount of damage, and each time you're only dealing back 30% in return, you're going to go down fairly quickly. 46% chance to evade one attack. Oh, for goodness, that's at level 1. Hopefully that's 100% at level 10. And this here, if you put this counter attack up, perhaps so that it's not hitting 30% at 10, but maybe it's hitting 50 or 60% at 10, that could become usable, because that actually does deal out quite a significant amount of damage. But they're very, very squidgy with 675 health. Perhaps bring that up a tad as well. Speed 60, got to be the slowest ship in the game. Initiative 80 is not spectacularly great. Maybe pump that to 85. So I think a few little tweaks with health and initiative here. Increase that counter attack damage. Black Hat suddenly might become very, very usable. Next up, we've got the Mayhem. Now, I had a look at these before and I quite like the look of them. That base damage there of 192 to 230 really caught my eye, and then I realised it's a medium unit, so it's base damage 96 to 115. It's a medium strike craft. I have not seen anyone using these guys in the game at all. It has a half decent initiative, speed of 100. There are other ships that are faster for pathing. Damage received, medium plating minus 10%. Again, it's a nothing skill, isn't it? And against medium strike craft, damage dealt plus 2%. But we've just actually looked at a strike craft that deals our extra 30% damage against medium strike craft and has a minus percentage, minus 20 for damage received from them. So perhaps replace this with, I can't remember which one it was now. Was it a Tyrannis? This one here. Let's have a quick look. Medium specialist against medium, damage plus 30, damage received minus 20. Coming back here to Omega, and this is also medium specialist, but against medium strike, damage dealt plus 2. So that's going to go up to 30%. I don't really understand how this is different, because most of these skills increment by multiplying by 10. So I honestly don't know what you're doing with that one. That needs sorting out, and make it the same as that, as the Tyrannis one we looked at. And this here, perhaps you could, this would be a good place to perhaps have that elemental damage reduction skill that I talked about earlier. Make it a specialist, where we had either capital ship reduction or elemental reduction. Perhaps you could even say physical damage only reduced by 25%, 30%, I don't know. We need to do something with it for sure. And last but not least, here in the Omega area, we've got the Devourer. Again, I've never really seen them on the field. It's a close range light. It's got the base damage and initiative and speed of 60s, not great. So going up against the Harpy, how does it stack? Well, we've got a 1% chance to evade damage, which again I said is a bit of a nothing skill. We want probably that to raise from 10% at max level to maybe 25% might be useful. Against close range strike craft, damage dealt plus 2. Well, that could become potentially useful if it wasn't for this really low damage dealing amount here. You can either increase the damage dealt amount, or you could go against close range strike craft damage dealt, instead of plus 20, bang it up to plus 50 or something. Actually go big and make that useful. Vanguard. I've actually been playing around with a few of these because I thought they might have some potential. And I thought they might have some potential loaded on top of a Paladin, which gives extra defensive bonus. It basically adds 200% to your defense. Unfortunately, the Morning Star, bugged as it is not protecting these strike craft that I've built from the Vanguard faction. And so therefore they're just getting wiped out. Anyway, let's take a quick look. On hit, target enemy target defense minus 20%. That's quite good because it's got an initiative of 100. It will come in before those of your ships running at 80 and knock down the defenses a little. It's reasonable. I think maybe you could bump that up to about 25%. Basically, I look at this ship as softening things up a little. And it does receive less in terms of damage from long range strike craft, but honestly, by the time it's doing its job, you want it in the first turn or two before they all get wiped out by a capital ship. You want them to withstand some damage, and you want them to be able to go toe to toe with something. So they've got a specific place in there. They just tend to get wiped out when you can't protect them. I think it would be nice if you had a priority on this, as well as the on-hit enemy target defense. That might be good. You could prioritize heavy strike craft and then improve this up to, say, reduce the defense by 50%. You could have it prioritizing medium, although we've got a few that do that already, or you could have it prioritizing perhaps rather than just light, but prioritizing long range strike craft, and knocking them out, getting them knocked out further. So let's have a few nuances put into this that could be useful for there. What have we got here? The glaive. It's a medium. It's half decent. It's got a high initiative. It's got base damage, and it's damage received minus 10. Okay, you could leave it at that. Make medium plating minus 15 perhaps. And when it gets hits, it's always going to do a counter attack, which is decent. But as we said before, those counter attacks probably need to be a little bit higher if this base damage is so low. Alternatively, just plump this up a little bit, and that could become really good. They can be used at the moment, but they're very ship specific, and you really need something that's going to protect those something specific for Vanguards. Moving on to the Eldarin. Sorcerers actually, a few people are using sorcerers. I've used sorcerers from time to time, and the general reason for using a sorcerer is you've got this unaffected by stun. You've got a long range light craft, so it's firing from the back. It's not as easy to target, and then against close range strike craft you get an extra 20% damage. And I've seen people trying to sort of put them into a formation that knocks out the Cyclops and things like that, but unless they're prioritizing that, that's not necessarily particularly good. I know that the Cyclops will pull that damage in for the first 3 rounds, but if it's still standing after that, then it's done its task, and your extra 20% against it really is peanuts. Admittedly, they're light, so you've got this high range of damage here. But again, against the Harpy, you're always going to put Harpies in instead. This initiative's quite high. It's situational. They're kind of okay. I would maybe, to make them a bit more useful, bump that health up to 900 so that they can actually withstand a bit of damage as well. And that would include that defense plus 20%. Counter the close range strike craft damage. It's kind of okay. They're bearable at the moment. If you're making other strike craft viable, then there might be a use for that one. And then we've got the Berserker, which is the medium in the Eldarin range, and health is 1425, not too bad. This is effectively the same as 120 to 130 damage, base damage. So that's considerably better than most of the light range craft. It's got a high initiative. Damage received, medium plating, know my feelings on that. And this is good against heavy strike craft, so plus 20%. Again, situational. If you want to come in and try and get a bit of a score against the tank, then that it doesn't need too much doing to it. You could probably argue that damage amount could go up. Again, it's not doing anything a Harpy can't do better. So just play with the stats perhaps a little bit. It goes off before the Harpy. And then finally we've got in here the Guardian, another light close range strike craft, base damage, slightly higher initiative than the Harpy, better health, and 95% chance to evade 1 attack at level 10. So that's not too bad. And then each round 38% chance to gain a follow-up at level 10. Come on, that's sorry for my language, but that's crap. Honestly, that really is. When you've got other ships out there that are getting 70% chance to counter attack, 100% chance to follow up. Really, honestly, that if you want to match the Harpy, then put that at 100% chance to gain follow-up, or at least 75-80% chance, giving it's only going to evade 1 attack. You can do a lot better there, and certainly that follow-up needs to be a lot higher. Terra, again, something I've just been playing around with. There is a place for some of these ships. It's situational, medium plating again on a medium ship, prioritizing enemies with the lowest health, and against close range strike craft, damage dealt plus 10%. That's really kind of good, prioritizing those ones with the lowest health, but you're doing it at real base damage here, so just bump that up. Against close range strike craft, damage dealt plus 50 or 60%, please. That 10% is not going to do anything. Next up we have got the Eagle, and this one actually is relatively been a little bit useful, because at level 10 on hit enemy target defense minus 50% for 1 round. It's initiative of 80, and depending on how you set your battle group up and composition of officers and everything else, sometimes these will go off before the Harpy. So the Harpy's first shot in the battle, maybe if you're lucky, hitting something that's already got 50% of its defense gone down. So that's really handy. I would love to see this just with an initiative bump to 120, and that would be a fantastically useful strike craft. And we've got this medium specialist again, so damage plus 30 against medium craft. I mean, that could be a real kind of medium craft killer. So really, just for me, just bump this initiative up to 120 and let it go do its thing, and people will be using those in droves. And finally we come up with this, with the Warthog. And we've got health of 900, it's on a light, it's standard, initiative is high, and damage is kind of base. First one instance of damage dealt in battle plus 50% at 10. No, put it at 100%, for goodness sake. Its base damage is, honestly, it's piddly. If you've got a Harpy at twice this amount of damage, shooting twice, that's 4 times as much damage as this thing can put out, and you're only giving it 100% for one time in a battle. That's just awful. And the counter attack here I've already talked about, so that's fairly normal. And honestly, get rid of this normal damage, minus 10%. It's on such low damage as are the other craft base damage that they're not usable currently. Stonar, here we go, and the Crusher. Now the Crusher, I have seen people use a few Stonar Craft because it's a bit like kind of, they're based on the dwarves, and there's this mentality among some players of we are dwarfies till we die, and that's great. Unfortunately, you're at a bit of a disadvantage, and we'd like to change that. So thermal damage received minus 2%. Well, given that there's only 1 or 2 ships and 1 or 2 strike craft that actually put out any thermal damage at all, that is next to useless. Please change it to all elemental damage received minus 2% or minus 20%. That would be fantastic. Standard attacks deal 82% thermal damage at level 1, and then they go up probably to about, I don't know, 130%. That's good. I like that. Hopefully that's in as a passive skill, not an active one. But if you could perhaps change this to all elemental based damage, so that's thermal, radiation and energy minus 20%, this little fella might be rocking it. You know, more sort of tanky and getting in there, and is not going to be doing a lot of physical damage. But that energy damage here, the thermal damage here as an elemental attack, which ignores the defense on another ship, that's pretty good. So yeah, just a slight change there. And next up we've got the Rock Thrower. It's light, it's got a really good damage here, and he's really squidgy, and he goes before a Harpy. First round damage dealt plus 4%, so plus 40% in the first round. It's nothing again when you're going up against ships with 100% chance of a follow-up. 50% chance for physical damage only, received minus 2, so that'll be minus 20%. So yeah, okay, if you're going up against a Cypher or something like that, that might be a bit useful. I would probably bump that up, damage received, to minus sort of 30-35%. And this then might have a place somewhere, and this first round damage dealt, just stick it up to 100 or 150%, something like that. It's only going to shoot off once, and this has got a ship that attached to a capital ship that gives it an extra shot. Annihilator, close range medium, base damage again, initiative's okay, health normal for that sort of medium range. Where we go, medium blazing, yes, we know my feelings on that. And frontline defender, so damage received from enemy close range strike craft minus 15%. I don't know why you'd want to be using this thing as a tank when everything, there's so much that tank's better. So I'm not sure quite what its purpose is. If this was much higher, it might become useful. Its health and defense are not particularly fantastic. They're still very average. I'm not quite sure what we're trying to do here with this. Perhaps if you could fiddle around with a number of the stats and improve them, then these skills might stay the same. Alternatively, bump this skill up considerably. It might have a position, but it's not really a tank. You know, it's got decent damage skills in here, and the way that everything works out in terms of the way that the defense is tiered alongside the hit points for going from light to medium to heavy craft, really anything that's in the light and perhaps some of the medium range strike crafts, they're not there to tank, quite frankly, when you've got a Cyclops or you've got the Morning Star going in there. And talking of the Morning Star, it's the last one we're going to look at, because going back here to where are we want to go to Vanguard, and we want to go to this Morning Star here. This would be a great tank. Unfortunately it's not, because this does not work. Make this work and that will go back to being great again. So if we could fix up some bugs and then make some changes to these, we would be in a situation where out of the 3, 8, 24 strike craft that we have available to us, we would be using more than 4 or 5 of them, of which 2 are actually siege specialists. So that's my thoughts on the strike craft. I'd love to see them being given some love, and ideally to the extremes that I've suggested, and then take it from there with player feedback as to whether some of those combinations with capital ships have become a bit too overpowered or not, and adjust accordingly from there. Thank you very much for watching. I know it's been a long piece. We needed to get across a few points and some solutions, because I'm all about providing those solutions rather than just highlighting the problems. And hopefully we can see some changes, ideally before the end of this season too, so we have an opportunity to actually start testing them before you launch the, if you like, the revised game for season 3. Thank you very much.